I thought I was watching a pack of wolves hunt, until I realized they weren't after a kill. They were about to do something no human would believe. When the wolf burst out from behind the spruce, my breath caught. Because I realized he wasn't looking at me, I froze in my tracks on the narrow, snow-covered trail. The cold air stung my cheeks. The weight of my old rifle slung over my shoulder felt heavier than usual. I was heading home after checking a few traps, a habit I'd kept for decades. This stretch of winter forest was always quiet at dusk, just the crunch of my boots and the occasional raven calling from the pines. But then I heard it, a scream, a woman's voice, high, raw, and frantic. At first I thought I was imagining it. Sound plays tricks in the cold. But there it was again, sharper this time. My eyes swept the clearing up ahead, and I saw her, maybe 30 yards away, in the middle of a small, snow-covered hollow. Her arms were thrashing, her face white with terror, her mouth open in another scream. And then I saw what she was in. Not snow, but the half-frozen surface of a bog. I took a step toward her, and that's when he appeared, a massive gray wolf, leaping through the drifts from the tree line, muscles rolling under his winter coat. His breath poured from his mouth in pale clouds. He was coming straight for us. Instinct took over. My hand shot to the rifle, but I never got the chance to aim, because he didn't charge me. He didn't even glance at me. He stopped, planting himself between me and the woman, head low, legs spread, tail stiff. He wasn't attacking. He was blocking me. I was sure he was about to lunge at me, but he didn't. He just stared, straight into my eyes. I've seen wild wolves before. Their gaze is sharp, calculating, the look of a predator sizing you up. This was different. There was no hatred there, no hunger, just urgency, a deep, almost human worry. And it rattled me more than teeth or snarls ever could. Behind him, the woman flailed, snow and black water sucking at her hips. The bog made a sound like wet cloth tearing every time she moved. The wolf flicked his head toward her, then back to me, almost as if he was trying to tell me something. I took a cautious step to the right. He mirrored it. I stepped left. So did he. He was keeping me in place. "Are you insane?" I muttered under my breath. "She's going to drown." Without warning, the wolf broke from his stance and darted in a wide arc around the bog. His paws barely broke the crust of snow, his body a blur against the white. He stopped near the edge, where the ice turned dark with water beneath, and lifted his muzzle high. Then he let out a short, sharp howl. It wasn't the long, echoing call I've heard in deep winter nights. This was clipped, urgent, a signal. It sent a shiver right through me. The woman's cries were growing weaker. Her arms trembled as she clawed at the snow around her, but each time it slid back into the freezing water. The wolf lowered his head, stepping with delicate precision, testing the ground before each move. I wanted to run in and grab her. Every muscle screamed to move, but something about the way he moved, the care, the purpose, rooted me where I stood. This wasn't random. This wasn't a predator circling easy prey. From somewhere deep in the trees came an answer, another howl, then another, closer. My eyes snapped toward the sound. Two shapes emerged from the shadows, moving fast over the snow. Wolves. Now I was certain. This was it. The end. I lifted the rifle to my shoulder, finger brushing the trigger, but the big gray turned his head toward me again, locking eyes with mine. And I swear, in those yellow eyes, there was no threat, just a request. It made my hands falter. I lowered the gun. The two newcomers reached the bog's edge and immediately began pawing at the snow, pushing clumps of moss and ice toward the woman, almost as if building a surface for her. She stared at them wide-eyed, her lips blue, too exhausted to scream now. The gray wolf stepped closer to her, lifting a paw and pressing it gently against her shoulder, the way a person might steady a friend. My stomach flipped. This wasn't a hunting pack. This was something else entirely. In that moment, the last piece of my fear slipped into something stranger. Disbelief. There was worry in his eyes, not rage, and that rattled me to my core. I took another slow step toward the bog, testing the crust under my boots. The wolves all turned their heads toward me, but none moved to block me this time. They just watched. That's when I knew. I was standing in the middle of something I had no words for, something I shouldn't even be seeing. The gray wolf began to circle the bog, his paws placing themselves in deliberate, measured steps. He kept his body low, head down, ears twitching as if every shift in the snow told him something. Then he stopped and started digging, quick, forceful strokes of his paws, sending snow and clumps of frozen moss flying behind him. At first I thought he was just restless, or maybe trying to find a safer footing. But as I watched, it hit me. He was looking for something, or maybe calling for something. Every few seconds he would pause, glance toward the woman, then glance into the dark fringe of trees beyond. Her breathing was ragged now, shallow. The black water clung to her waist like a fist. She tried to lift herself, but the bog pulled back with a slow, sucking sound. Then I heard it, faint at first, almost mistaken for the wind, a distant howl. My pulse jumped. Another answered, closer. And then, from between the pines, 2 more wolves appeared, moving fast but with the same cautious precision as the first. I gripped the stock of my rifle. 3 wolves now. If they decided we were the easier prey, there'd be no stopping them. But they didn't come for me. They didn't even glance in my direction. They ran straight to the edge of the bog, right where the woman struggled. The moment they reached her, they dropped their heads and began shoving snow and moss toward her with their muzzles, stamping it down with their paws. I stood there, completely still, trying to make sense of it. They weren't attacking her. They weren't tearing at her clothes or flesh. They were building something, a surface. I told myself I was wrong, that I was watching them toy with her before the kill, like cats with a mouse. That made more sense. Predators play with prey, don't they? And yet, every movement was careful. Every push of moss seemed aimed to keep her from sinking deeper. She turned her head weakly toward them, eyes glassy, lips trembling. She didn't scream anymore. I don't think she had the strength. One of the wolves brushed her arm with his muzzle, then stepped back as the big gray moved in. He stood beside her, paws planted on a patch of frozen moss. He lowered his head, then, and I will never forget this, he lifted one paw and placed it gently against her shoulder, not shoving, not pinning, just steadying her. I saw him push her toward the edge, carefully, like a person might guide someone across thin ice, and in that second, something inside me cracked. This wasn't hunting. This wasn't instinct I'd been told about. This was something else entirely. One of the smaller wolves kept darting between 2 points, pulling up tufts of grass and laying them down in front of her like steps. The third one moved in a slow arc, pressing down the loose snow around her hips so it would hold. I stood there frozen, my breath clouding the air. My mind kept trying to shove the scene into something I understood: territorial behavior, strange coincidence, anything. But every detail kept shoving back. The woman was trembling, but I saw her right hand clutch at the moss the wolves had packed beneath her. It held. The gray wolf stepped back slightly, ears flicking toward me, his eyes locked on mine again, and I felt the weight of that look in my chest. It was almost as if he was telling me, "Now it's your turn." I should have moved then, but I didn't. I couldn't, because in that moment, all I could think was how absurd it would sound if I ever tried to tell this story. 3 wolves, working together, not to kill a human, but to save one. Who would believe that? The smaller wolf nudged the woman again, his nose against her arm, as if urging her to shift her weight. The gray pressed his shoulder into hers, guiding her toward the patch they'd built. Every movement deliberate, every touch careful. And I remember thinking, if this is playing with prey, it's the strangest game I've ever seen. I couldn't take it anymore, standing there while she fought for her life, while these wolves worked around her. It was tearing at me. My instincts screamed to move. My boots crunched forward through the snow. The gray wolf's head snapped toward me instantly. I froze mid-step. His body stiffened, ears forward, his breath fogging the air between us. The woman's lips moved, but no sound came. She was shivering so hard her teeth clicked, her face ghostly pale. I could hear her breath now, short, shallow gasps, each one weaker than the last. I tried another step. The gray's lips curled just enough to show the faint line of his teeth. Not a full snarl, more like a warning, a boundary. I stopped again. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the smaller wolf, the one with a white patch on his chest, clamp his jaws on the woman's scarf. He tugged, sharp and deliberate. The other wolf, the darker one, grabbed at the strap of the bag slung over her shoulder. They weren't biting her. They weren't even tearing at the fabric like scavengers. They were pulling, testing. For a moment, her body shifted upward an inch or two. A wet sucking sound came from the bog, like it didn't want to let go. Her head tilted toward them, and she whispered something I couldn't make out. Her voice was hoarse, just a broken thread of sound. Every muscle in me wanted to run in and take her hand, but the gray was still between us, eyes locked on mine. Then something changed. He let out a short, low chuff, not a growl, not a howl, and stepped back. 3 paces. The 2 smaller wolves still tugged gently at her clothes, trying to coax her forward. The gray kept backing away until he was no longer between me and her. Then he stopped, squared himself to me, and met my eyes again. I thought, finally, he understands. He's letting me in. He's decided I'm not a threat. I took that first step toward her, heart pounding in my ears. The snow under me gave a little, the crust cracking. I kept my eyes on the woman's, trying to will her to hang on. But then the gray moved again. Forward this time, fast, closing the gap between us in 2 long strides. Not charging, not snapping, but with such sudden purpose that I stopped dead. He stood there, chest heaving, our faces maybe 6 feet apart, and in his eyes, it wasn't trust, it wasn't even warning. It was something heavier. It was expectation. He was looking at me like I was the one who had to make the next move, the final move, the one to end this. That look pinned me harder than any threat could have. It was like he was saying, I've done what I can. Now it's on you. The woman's arms slid down, her fingers brushing the surface of the moss they'd packed. The smaller wolf shifted his grip on her scarf, pulling in a slow, steady rhythm, like he'd done it before. The darker one kept pressing moss under her, pushing it toward her hips with his snout. I swallowed hard and stepped forward again. This time, the gray didn't block me. He moved aside, pacing to my left, his gaze flicking between me and her. I was close enough now to see the ice crusting at the edges of her hair, the gray blue of her lips. I could smell the bog, that sour, earthy rot beneath the snow. I reached for her, kneeling on the hard-packed snow the wolves had built up. My gloves closed around her wrists. Her skin was ice-cold. She was lighter than I expected, as if half her weight had already gone into the water. The smaller wolf gave one last tug on her scarf, then stepped back, ears flat. The darker one did the same, standing just far enough away to watch. The gray stood perfectly still, eyes never leaving mine. I realized my hands were trembling. I pulled. She rose an inch. The bog groaned. I pulled again, teeth clenched, feeling the icy water splash against my boots. And for the first time since he appeared, the gray wolf took a step forward, not to interfere, but to stand beside me, shoulder to shoulder. I didn't dare look at him, but I could feel his presence there, not threatening, not even protective, just present, as if to say, "We're doing this together." I dropped to my knees. The cold bit through my pants instantly, but I didn't care. The only way to reach her was to crawl, slow and low, keeping my weight spread over the crust of snow the wolves had trampled into place. The gray wolf watched me for a moment, then moved to the side, clearing a path. The other two stepped back as well, circling to the edges of the bog as if they knew exactly where the ground was safest. I started forward, inch by inch. The ice groaned beneath me, a deep, hollow sound that made my gut tighten. Each time my knee pressed down, the snow cracked in a jagged line toward the water. When I was halfway to her, I felt the surface shift under my chest, and then give. The crust split with a sharp crack, and I sank, the cold water grabbing my leg like a hand. I gasped. My arms shot out to spread my weight, but the hole widened, the snow breaking away in chunks. The shock of the icy water sent pain straight up my spine. My boot was stuck, the suction pulling me down. Before I could even think to shout, there was a rush of movement beside me. The gray wolf lunged forward, teeth flashing, and clamped onto the thick fabric of my jacket. He jerked backward, the force nearly dislocating my shoulder, but my leg came free. I slid onto firmer snow, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The wolf released me immediately, stepping back without so much as a growl. I lay there for a second, sucking in ragged breaths, staring at him. His sides heaved, steam rising off his coat, and all I could think was, he just pulled me out. I crawled forward again, more carefully this time. The wolves shadowed my movements, keeping just far enough away to avoid adding their weight to the fragile surface. The woman was sinking fast now. The water had climbed to her waist, the black surface lapping against the heavy folds of her coat. Her eyes were half closed, her lips moving without sound. "Stay with me," I muttered, the words as much to myself as to her. The gray reached her first. He crept to the edge, leaned down, and bit into the thick fabric of her sleeve. Not hard, just enough to hold. He braced his legs wide and began to pull, slow and steady. I slid in beside him, lying flat to spread my weight, and reached for her hands. Her skin was like ice. My gloves slipped on her wet fingers, so I locked my grip around her wrists instead. "Got you," I said, though I wasn't sure if she could hear me. We pulled together, me from the front, the wolf from the side. She shifted upward, just a little, enough for the bog to make a sick, sucking sound. Her legs kicked weakly under the water. I gritted my teeth and pulled harder, feeling the strain in my arms and lower back. The wolf gave a short, deep growl, not at me, but in effort, and his paws dug deeper into the snow for leverage. Slowly, inch by inch, she began to rise. First her hips cleared the surface, then her thighs. Water poured off her clothes in sheets, soaking the snow beneath us. With one final heave, she slid onto the mossy patch the other wolves had built, collapsing face down in the snow. She coughed once, twice, water spraying from her mouth. I scrambled closer, rolling her onto her back, checking that she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, quick movements. Her eyes fluttered open for half a second, then closed again. I turned to the gray, ready to say something, though I had no idea what. But he was already stepping back, his gaze sweeping over both of us like he was taking stock. We had her out. She was alive. And for the first time since this all began, I let myself believe it was over. We'd done it. We'd pulled her from the bog. I thought it was finished. I couldn't have been more wrong. She lay on the snow gasping, coughing hard, water streaming from her mouth and down her chin. Each breath was ragged but real. I stayed crouched beside her, one hand on her shoulder, just listening to that sound, the sound of someone still alive. For the first time since I'd heard her scream, I felt my body loosen. We'd made it. She was out. The wolves, whatever this had been, it was over. That's when the gray wolf's head snapped up. His ears went stiff, his gaze locked past me into the trees, and a low, rolling growl rose from deep in his chest. I turned. At first I saw nothing but the black shapes of spruce trunks and the drifting mist of my own breath. Then, between two trees, a shape moved. Broad, heavy, deliberate. A bear. Its fur was mottled with frost, shoulders humped, head swaying side to side as it walked. Even at this distance I could hear the crunch of its weight on the snow. It must have caught the scent or the sound of the struggle and come to investigate. The woman didn't move. She might not have even known it was there, but the wolves did. The gray stepped forward immediately, his body stiff, tail low, a deep rumble vibrating in the air. The darker wolf moved to his right, the one with the white chest to his left. They formed a line, a wall of fur and teeth between us and the bear. I didn't even think to raise my rifle. Somehow, I knew it wouldn't matter. The bear stopped about 20 yards out, sniffing the air, head turning toward the wolves. It huffed, steam pluming from its muzzle, and took a slow step forward. The gray answered with a single sharp bark, not the wild howl from before, but something short and dangerous. His hackles rose in a ridge down his spine. The other two mirrored him, their stances tense, shoulders squared. The bear's eyes locked on them, ignoring me and the woman completely. It took another step, testing them. The wolves didn't move back. If anything, they leaned forward. Something in that moment hit me hard. They weren't defending territory. They weren't just protecting their own. They were standing for us. And it didn't make sense. Not in any way the world had ever taught me to understand wolves. But there it was, right in front of me. The bear stopped again, swinging its head, weighing the distance. The gray's growl deepened until I could feel it in my bones. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the bear let out a short grunt, swung its head away, and began to back into the trees. Step by step, it faded into the shadows until there was nothing but the sound of branches snapping in the distance. My chest loosened. I let out a long, shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was over, this time for real. The danger was gone. I turned toward the gray wolf, ready to, God knows what. Thank him, speak, anything. I opened my mouth, but before I could say a word, his head swung back toward the trees again. She was lying on her back now, her breathing steadier but still shallow. Her eyes opened for a moment, then filled with tears. At first I thought it was just the shock, the cold, the relief of being alive. But then she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, brittle and raw. They found me yesterday. I blinked at her. Who? She nodded toward the wolves still standing at the edge of the clearing, their bodies half turned toward the woods but their eyes flicking back to us. They found me, she repeated, her voice trembling. I was lost. I'd been walking for hours. No idea where I was. And then I saw them, all three. I stared at her, my mind trying to force her words into some other shape. They didn't touch me, she went on, the words spilling out between small, sharp breaths. Didn't growl, just stood there, watching. Then the gray one. Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard. He turned and started walking away. The others followed, and I followed them. The image that formed in my head didn't make sense. Wolves don't lead humans through the woods. Wolves don't tolerate humans trailing behind them. They took me along a frozen stream, she said, her gaze unfocused, like she was watching it all again in her mind. The snow was easier there. I thought maybe they were guiding me out. I don't even know why I trusted them. I just did. I glanced at the wolves. None of them looked at me. Their attention was still fixed on the tree line. But the gray's ears twitched, as if he could hear every word. It got dark, she continued, her voice quieter now. I tried to keep up, but I was tired. I must have fallen behind. I saw them waiting for me up ahead, and I hurried. Her voice broke. I stepped wrong. The ice, it just gave way. I went through, into the water under the snow. Her hands clenched at the fabric of her coat. I screamed. They were there in seconds. All three. They tried to pull me out, but I was stuck, and the light was gone. I told them to go, but they stayed. They stayed all night. I could see it now, her trapped in that dark, freezing hole, the wolves pacing the edge, unable to help, but refusing to leave. The idea sent a cold through me that had nothing to do with the snow under my knees. In the morning, she whispered, they started building something, pulling moss, packing snow. I didn't understand. I still don't. She shook her head slowly, as if the weight of it was too much. Her voice was fading, each word softer than the last. And then you came. I didn't know what to say. I looked at her, then at the wolves, then back again. It was too much to process, too far outside the rules I thought I knew about nature. For a moment, I let myself believe it was exactly what it sounded like. A miracle. A lost woman, found by a pack of wolves. Wolves that didn't harm her, but guided her, stayed with her, protected her, even tried to save her when she fell into the bog. I thought this was a story about a miracle, but I was wrong. She was quiet for a moment, staring up at the pale winter sky. Her lips trembled as she spoke again, softer than before. They weren't looking for me, she said. I frowned. What do you mean? Her eyes shifted toward the gray wolf, who still stood watch at the edge of the clearing. They were looking for their pup. For a second, I didn't understand. The words didn't fit with the scene I'd just lived through. My mind stalled on them, turning them over like stones in my hand. Then something inside me told me to look, really look, at the edge of the bog. I scanned the snow and ice, and that's when I saw it. A small mound, half buried where the crust had been broken. Just enough of it was visible, a patch of soft gray fur, darker at the tips, the size of a curled-up house cat. A lump rose in my throat. I crawled closer, my knees crunching through the top layer of snow. The closer I got, the more I could see. The tiny paw, stiff with cold, the fragile curve of a head tucked under, the frost clinging to the fur. It wasn't moving. It hadn't been moving for a long time. A wolf pup. The air around me seemed to thin. I could feel the eyes of the pack on me, heavy and silent. I didn't need to look to know they were watching. I understood then. This was why they had come here, why they had lingered at the bog. They hadn't been waiting for a lost woman. They'd been searching for one of their own. And when they found her instead of the pup, they didn't walk away. I sat back on my heels, staring at that tiny body. My chest felt tight, my breath coming shallow. I thought of the hours they must have spent here before I arrived, trying to pull it free, nudging it, digging around it, refusing to accept what had already happened. And when another living thing, even the wrong one, was trapped in the same death, they couldn't leave it there. I thought of all the times I'd heard people talk about wolves as nothing more than killers. I'd believed it myself, more often than not. But killers don't stand in the cold all night for something that isn't even their own. They saved me, the woman said quietly, her voice breaking, because they couldn't save him. The gray wolf turned his head toward us then, not for long, just enough for our eyes to meet. There was no rage in that look, no triumph, no fear, just something I couldn't name, something older than words, and it hit me hard, sharper than the cold in my bones. They had done for her, and for me, what I could never have done for them. If I'd found their pup in that water, I know myself well enough to admit it. I wouldn't have risked my life to save it. I would have told myself nature was nature, that some things just happen, and I would have walked away. But they hadn't. They'd spent every ounce of strength they had to keep a living thing from dying alone, even when it wasn't theirs, even when it wasn't their kind. The pup's fur stirred slightly as the wind shifted, and for a strange moment, it felt like he was still part of the scene, like he was the reason every impossible thing that had happened here had happened at all. The gray took a step forward, closing the space between himself and the small mound. He didn't touch it. He just stood there, head lowered, the steam of his breath curling over the snow. The other two came to stand beside him. The three of them stood together, silent, their bodies blocking the wind from that tiny shape in the snow. And I realized they weren't ready to leave yet. The gray wolf stayed beside the pup for a long moment, the steam of his breath curling into the pale air. Then, without a sound, he turned away. The other two followed him, their paws pressing soundless paths into the snow. They didn't look back, not once. I watched them until their shapes blurred into the trees, until the gray of their coats melted into the gray of the forest. And then, they were gone. The silence that followed was strange, not empty, but charged, as if the air still held the echo of what had just happened. The woman shifted beside me, pulling her coat tighter, her breath shallow but steady. I put a hand on her shoulder, more to steady myself than her. My whole body was trembling. It wasn't the cold, it was the weight of it all, what I'd seen, what I couldn't explain. My mind kept circling back to the same thought, over and over, like a line carved into stone. Animals remember kindness, even when you haven't given it to them. I thought of the hours they'd stood guard over her, the way they'd worked together to keep her from sinking, the way they'd stood between us and the bear, and all of it, had been born out of a grief they hadn't been able to undo. They didn't owe her anything. They certainly didn't owe me anything. But still, they'd acted. We stayed there for a while, catching our breath. Eventually, I helped her to her feet, and together, we began the slow walk back toward the trail. Every so often, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the gray wolf standing there. But the only marks left of them were the prints in the snow, already filling with the fine flakes drifting down from the sky. By the time we reached the main path, the light was thinning. The woman leaned on me, her steps unsteady, but she never spoke again. I didn't either. What was there to say? Anything I tried to put into words would sound impossible. That night, sitting by my fire, I replayed it all in my head. The first howl, the circle of paw prints around the bog, the way the gray had looked at me like I was the one who had to make the final move. And no matter how many times I turned it over, it still didn't feel real. But it had been real. I'd seen it. I'd felt the pull of the gray's teeth on my jacket, the weight of the woman's wrists in my hands as we dragged her free. I'd heard the rumble in his chest when the bear appeared, and I'd seen the still shape of the pup and the way they'd stood over him. The image wouldn't leave me. A week later, I went back. I told myself it was to check the traps, but I knew that wasn't true. I needed to see the place again, to prove to myself it was still there, that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. The snow was deeper now, the air sharper. The clearing was quiet when I stepped into it, just the faint creak of trees swaying in the wind. The bog lay frozen and still, its surface covered in an unbroken layer of white. But when I came closer, I saw them, tracks, fresh ones. They curved along the edge of the clearing, just where the wolves had stood that day. I followed them with my eyes. And then I saw something else, my own boot prints, From that day, shallow now, softened by snow, but still there, and right beside them, so close they nearly overlapped, paw prints, 3 sets, 1 large, 2 smaller. They'd walked where I had walked, step for step. I knelt down, tracing the edge of one with my glove. The shape was perfect, the snow inside still crisp. These weren't old, they'd been here recently, maybe even this morning. For a moment I just stared, my breath hanging in the cold air. It hit me then. They hadn't just been passing through. They'd come back, and they'd remembered this place, remembered me. The thought tightened something in my chest. Not fear, not exactly awe either. Something heavier, something that made me feel small in the best possible way. Because whatever this was, whatever had happened here, it was no accident. I stood there for a long time, my eyes moving between the paw prints and my own fading tracks. The wind brushed against the back of my neck, cold and light. Somewhere in the distance, far enough that it might have been my imagination, a single howl rose over the snow. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. People say things like this don't happen, that wild animals are wild for a reason, that there's no room in nature for mercy, or for grief, or for anything like what I'd seen. But I know better now, because I was there, and I saw it myself. If your heart is full of reverence right now, right, nature is wiser than we are. A wild bear cub came to a human village, not to eat, not to escape, but to ask for help. What happened next left even the forest silent. When I first saw him at the edge of the village, I caught my breath because I realized he didn't come here by accident. I had woken before dawn, the chill of early morning brushing against my skin as I stepped onto the creaking wooden porch of my little cottage. At 60, retired and alone, my days began with the steady routine of feeding my chickens and tending the small garden I'd planted near the fence. But that morning, something felt different. An electric stillness lingered in the air, and when I glanced past the worn picket fence, I froze. There, barely 10 yards away, stood a cub, a bear cub, dirty and scrawny, its fur matted with mud and tangled grass. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. He didn't growl or scamper back into the woods. He simply stood, trembling ever so slightly, and watched me. Fear lanced through me. I'd read stories of cubs who'd wander close to humans, lost and desperate, but I never imagined I'd find myself face to face with one. My hands curled into fists on the railing. My mind raced. Should I slam the door and call for help? Should I scare him off? But his eyes, those dark, glassy eyes, held something I couldn't ignore. A plea, not wild hunger or instinctual panic, but a raw, human-like longing. He shifted his weight, each step deliberate and unhurried. My breath caught again. How could a creature so fierce show such vulnerability? I fought the urge to back away, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. His gaze never wavered. Then he sat, right there, on his haunches, paws folded neatly before him. It was as if he understood that, to be heard, he had to wait. He didn't pace. He didn't whimper. He just waited, silent and patient, commanding more attention than any roar ever could. My chest tightened. 1,000 thoughts surged and died in an instant. What if his mother was injured? What if he was starving? What if I moved too suddenly and provoked him? My fingers trembled on the railing. Never had I felt so small, so unprepared. He cocked his head, watching me with those imploring eyes. A single droplet of dawnlight caught in his fur, illuminating the sadness etched across his tiny muzzle. My rational mind clamored, "This is a wild animal. Get back, stay safe." But my heart ached. I whispered a shaky greeting, voice cracking in the quiet morning. "Hey there, little one." My words seemed too soft, too hushed for such an impossible scene. Yet somehow, they reached him. His ears twitched. He blinked as though acknowledging my presence. A thread of connection wove between us, one that felt older than any language, deeper than any fear. Time slowed. The sun crept higher, unveiling more of the world around us, the dew-drenched grass, the silent chicken coop, the empty road that led to the forest. And still he waited. I wanted to help, to shoo him inside, to feed him, anything to ease that desperate look. I climbed down from the porch and took a cautious step forward. The cub didn't flinch. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I extended a trembling hand. Just a gesture, no threat. He sniffed the air, then lowered his head slightly. I froze, breathless, waiting. The world held its breath with me. But then, he turned away. My pulse sank. He rose and padded back toward the trees, each step deliberate. My chest ached with relief and regret. Relief that he seemed unhurt, regret that I hadn't reached him in time. I exhaled, the tension ebbing from my shoulders. I watched until he vanished into the gloom of the forest's edge. The morning returned to its routine sounds. Birds chirping, wind rustling leaves, a distant rooster crowing. I blinked, still anchored at the fence, expecting, what? A sign? A thank you? Anything? I shook my head, rubbing my fists against my thighs. My heart was still racing. I searched the tree line, half expecting the cub to reappear, to call me back. But there was nothing, only the silent woods and my own thunderous breathing. I clambered back onto the porch and sank into the old rocking chair, legs trembling. The regular rhythm of the chair was grounding, but my mind spun with questions. Why had he come? Why had he trusted me, even for a moment? My chest clenched, the echo of his gaze lingering like an ember. Sunlight filtered around me now, painting the world in gold. The moment slipped into memory, but its weight stayed with me. I rubbed my eyes as if waking from a dream. Could I have imagined it? Could a wild creature really show such consciousness, such need? I reached for my pocket watch, an old heirloom that hadn't ticked in years. I flipped it open, maybe in hope that it would confirm time had moved forward. Instead, it hung on the chain, silent. The world felt suspended. I thought that was it, just a lost cub passing through, a strange encounter at dawn, a brush with nature that would fade like morning mist. I leaned back, pressing my palms to the wood of the rocking chair, trying to steady my racing thoughts, but deep inside, something told me this was only the beginning. I tried everything to scare him off. I waved my arms, shouted words I'd learned in wildlife pamphlets, and even banged a metal bucket against the fence posts. Yet, he didn't flinch. He simply sat there, mud caking his fur, eyes locked onto mine with a calm intensity that made my chest squeeze. I thought that if I could just make enough noise, he'd bolt back into the woods. But he didn't. He didn't even blink. He never touched the bowl of oats I'd scattered near the porch, nor did he paw at the trash I'd piled as bait. There was no growl, no desperate scratching for scraps, just that unwavering gaze. Every time I took a step toward the house for help, he remained still, as if rooted to the spot. My breath hitched, and I realized with a jolt that fear had curled its sharp claws around my throat. Then, unexpectedly, he rose. Slow, deliberate, almost graceful. My heart thundered. Was he going to charge? But instead of bristling his fur or letting out a roar, he walked toward the edge of the clearing, each padded step echoing in the silent dawn. He paused, turned his head, and looked back at me. He looked at me as if I were one of his own, as if he was pleading, "Come with me." I froze, torn between the impulse to retreat and the bubbling curiosity that surged through me. His eyes held no malice, no confusion, only what felt like an earnest beckoning. My mind raced. Why would a wild cub want me to follow? Was it trapped? Was there someone else out there? I took a cautious step forward. He took one step further into the trees. The space between us shrank by inches, Yet I felt as though I'd never been further from safety. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, imagining every horror scenario: poisoned trap, wounded mother lying in wait, a clan of bears ready to defend their young. But none of those horrific possibilities played out. Instead, when I hesitated again, he pressed on, head down, ears sliding back in the most human gesture of urging. He was confident, unafraid of me, unafraid of what lay beyond the tree line, and I found myself obeying, drawn by a force I couldn't name. We crossed the old picket fence together, him slipping under the broken boards, me climbing over with a dull creak. Leaves crunched beneath my boots as I followed him down the narrow deer path that wound into the heart of the forest. Birdsong drifted overhead, but it felt distant, as if nature itself had hushed to watch. At first, every snap of a twig made me jump. My senses were on high alert, shapes shifting in the underbrush, shadows that might be predators, the faint scent of pine and damp soil. Yet the cub never glanced back in fear. He moved steadily, pausing now and then to look at me, as if to ask, "Are you still with me?" I nodded, though he couldn't see. My throat was tight, but I managed to whisper, "I'm here." It felt like the most natural thing in the world, even as my rational mind screamed that I was risking everything. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees grew. Sunlight speckled the mossy floor in golden patches, and I realized I'd never noticed how serene this part of the woods could be. The cub led me over a fallen log and through a small clearing where dew glistened on ferns. I bent to brush the droplets off a blade of grass and looked up. He was watching me again, head tilted. He turned, and I followed. Then he paused at a strangely arranged pile of stones. My pulse leapt. Was this an animal den? A sacred shrine of the forest? He sniffed the stones, then lifted a paw to tap the largest one. The gesture was gentle, reverent, as if he acknowledged something I'd overlooked. I swallowed hard. What did this mean? Was he showing me something important? A memory? A warning? My chest tightened with anticipation. I took another step, ready to kneel and listen to whatever message he brought. But then, like a sigh in the wind, he turned once more and padded ahead, leaving me to my questions. I watched his silhouette merge with the greenery, heart thrumming with a mix of awe and unease. I decided he was just a wild creature who'd lost his mother. I swallowed hard and took a step forward, then another, until I found myself fully committed, following that scrawny cub into the heart of the forest. My rational mind screamed at me to turn back, but each time I glanced over my shoulder at the empty clearing, I felt a pang of guilt, as if I'd abandoned someone in dire need. So I pressed on. The moment we passed beneath the arching birches, sound fell away. Birdsong silenced, the whisper of wind through leaves stilled. It was as if the forest itself had hushed, watching us with bated breath. My footsteps on the pine needle carpet sounded loud enough to wake the dead. I could feel my pulse in my temples, every nerve alive with tension. My fear pulsed first. What if this was a trap? Wolves or the cub's mother lying in ambush? My breath came in short gasps, and I tightened my jacket around me, half expecting claws to tear through the fabric. But the cub pressed on, confident, his little claws making soft, scratching sounds on the mossy ground. He never faltered, never sniffed the air in alarm. He moved with purpose, as though he knew exactly where he was going. A shiver of awe rippled through me. This tiny creature, barely bigger than a large dog, had a command over this wild place that I could only envy. My eyes followed him as he navigated a tangle of roots without hesitation, slipped under a fallen birch, and bounded over a low-hanging branch. Doubt flickered next. Maybe I was hallucinating? Maybe the cub was leading me to my doom, and I'd be found days later, half-eaten? I stifled the thought and forced my legs to keep moving. My chest tightened when the path narrowed, and the trees hemmed us in so closely I could feel the damp bark alongside my arm. Yet I found myself trusting him, trusting that this little wild thing with his deep, imploring eyes was guiding me somewhere I needed to be. My heart swelled with gratitude for his silent leadership and for the mercy he seemed to extend by not turning back. Then, abruptly, he stopped. I almost ran into him, so sudden was his halt, and he turned his head toward a massive, uprooted oak. Its roots crowned the air like a fan, thick tendrils knotted together and dripping with soil. The cub padded forward and raised a front paw, then raked at the earth beneath the roots. His claws scraped dirt, stones, and broken wood. He worked with a frenzy I'd never seen, each motion urgent, fierce. A low rumble grew at the back of my throat, part fear, part wonder. The cub let out a sharp, keening whine that echoed through the hollow. My blood ran cold. His cry sounded so human, so desperate. It was as if he was summoning something or crying out for what had been stolen from him. My chest constricted. I had to step closer, but my legs trembled. I crouched at the edge of the upturned root ball and peered into the dark cavity beneath. Shadows pooled among the tangled roots, and I strained to see. Was there another cub trapped down there? A hidden den blocked by the giant tree's fall? My breath caught as I imagined the worst. The cub's mother crushed under the weight, her final moments spent guarding her offspring. But then, nothing stirred. No other shape emerged from the gloom. My throat tightened with relief, but the cub's frantic digging continued. He bared his teeth in a vicious snarl that cut against his usual silent sadness. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Never had I seen such ferocious protectiveness in such a small animal. I dropped to my knees and reached out, placing a tentative hand on the edge of the roots. "Hold on, little one," I whispered, voice quivering. The cub paused, lifted his head, and stared at my palm, as though seeking comfort. In that moment, the forest felt endless and infinite, my fear and the cub's sorrow merging into a single ache. Seconds stretched into minutes. My mind buzzed with questions I'd never imagined asking a wild creature. What were you doing down there? Who are you saving? But the cub only resumed digging, softer this time, as if he knew I was there to help. My heart swelled with compassion, and I sifted soil aside with trembling fingers, revealing tangled roots and stones. I thought he was simply playing, his youthful exuberance translating to frantic wrestling with the earth. I thought he'd tire soon, then turn away and let me return him to the safety of my porch, where food and shelter awaited. I thought this would be the end of our journey together, a wild cub's playful dance in the dirt, a harmless morning adventure. But as I watched the cub's determined efforts, I realized how wrong I was. This was no play. This was something far deeper, something I wasn't prepared for. And though I forced myself to whisper reassurances, my heart pounded with the understanding that this path we'd taken was only just beginning. I edged closer, every nerve in my body screaming to turn back, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Beneath the gnarled roots of the fallen oak lay something I never expected. A massive adult bear, her fur matted with earth, her massive form pinned by the weight of the tree. She was still, her rise and fall of breath gone silent. My heart hammered so fiercely, I feared it would echo through the hushed forest like a drumbeat of mourning. Beside her, curled in a ragged heap, was another cub, smaller even than the first, his flank heaving in slow, shallow gasps. He lay on his side, ribs visible under gray fur slick with blood and sweat. My throat constricted, hot tears springing unbidden to my eyes. The cub I'd followed here wasn't playing at all. He had been leading me to this terrible scene. He brought me to save his brother, I whispered, voice catching on the grief that weighed down my chest. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands trembling as I reached out. The cub lifted his head, eyes glazed but flickering with a spark of recognition when they found mine. He pushed his nose against my palm, a weak nudge that carried all the urgency of a desperate plea. "Help me." Tears slid down my cheeks as I pressed my fingers against the cub's cheek. My own fear melted into helpless sorrow. I'd never cried for the suffering of a wild animal before, never let grief shatter the barrier between human and beast. But here, in this silent cathedral of broken wood and shattered roots, I could do nothing but weep. I glanced back at the mother, her massive paw protruding from the dirt, her claws dulled by the earth that held her fast. I closed my eyes, inhaled, and forced my thoughts into action. Gently, I cradled the cub in my arms and rose unsteadily to my feet. He was so small, so fragile, I could almost cup him in one hand. I laid him on a patch of moss outside the root ball, where light filtered through the canopy in soft shards. His breathing remained shallow, but the rise and fall of his chest gave me hope. I looked around for anything that might help, branches to lever the roots, rocks to shift the weight, but fear and uncertainty clouded my judgment. The cub whimpered, a thin, broken sound that tore at my soul. He turned his head toward his mother's motionless form, eyes shining with a fierce love that no human could deny. I realized then that he was too weak to guide me further, that my presence here was the only lifeline he had left. He curled into my side, pressing his small body against my leg as if drawing strength from me. My heart clenched with a mix of terror and mercy. I pressed my cheek to his warm, quivering fur. "I've got you," I choked out. "I won't let you be alone." For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the cub's faint gasps and my ragged sobs. Then a wind stirred, rustling the remaining leaves overhead, and the forest exhaled. It was as if nature itself recognized my vow and held its breath in solemn solidarity. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and swallowed past the lump in my throat. The cub needed warmth, nourishment, care. I scanned the forest floor and spotted a fallen birch branch, sturdy and long enough to pry at the earth. Gripping it with both hands, I wedged it under a thick root and heaved. The branch trembled, then gave way, cracking the root free. One by one I shifted roots and stones, each movement sending dust into the air. My arms burned, my back screamed in protest, but I pressed on, fueled by the cub's soft whimpers and the memory of his pleading eyes. Finally, with a final desperate yank, I loosened the heaviest root. It fell away with a thud, leaving a space just wide enough to glimpse the mother bear's wounded form. My throat tightened. I couldn't reach her now. Her injury was too grave, her spirit too broken. But the cub, his chance remained. I scooped him into my jacket, cradling him as if he were my own child. He nestled into my chest, warily and gratefully, resting his head on my collarbone. I took a trembling step backward, then another, until I reached the forest's edge. The cub's body was shockingly light, skeletal, but his heartbeat fluttered against my chest, a fragile affirmation of life. I broke into a run, guided by instinct and the cub's faint warmth against me. Once clear of the fallen tree, I slowed, lowered myself to the ground, and laid him gently on a bed of ferns. His breath was more labored now, but it was there. I patted his side, offering the softest comfort I could muster. "Hang on," I whispered. "I'll get help." I promised. Tears blurred my vision as I tore through the undergrowth, racing back to the safety of the village and the faint hope that medicine and human kindness could tip the scales in this small creature's favor. Yet even as adrenaline carried me forward, a piece of my heart stayed behind, with two bears caught in the ruins of a fallen oak, one gone forever, the other clinging to the slimmest thread of hope. I thought rescuing this cub would be the end of my journey, a simple act of compassion. I thought this was the moment our story would close. But as the forest swallowed my hurried steps, I felt the weight of what had just begun, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. I carried him through the dim light of late afternoon, cradled against my chest like a trembling child. His breathing was ragged, each breath a struggle. I felt every labored inhale as if it were my own. By the time I reached the rickety barn at the edge of my property, dusk had settled in, and the world felt small and quiet. I laid a thick blanket on the straw-covered floor and gently eased the cub down. He trembled, but when I brushed his fur with a gentle hand, he pressed closer, seeking warmth. I fetched a shallow metal dish of warm milk, but he didn't reach for it. His eyes, heavy with pain, remained half-closed. I returned to the porch and called softly, "Come on out," half expecting him to bolt back into the night. Instead, from the tree line came the cub I had first encountered, the one who led me here. He padded forward, ears alert but calm, and when he reached the barn's doorway, he paused. His gaze flicked between me and the injured cub. Then, without hesitation, he stepped inside. He lowered himself into the straw beside his brother, body tense with watchful concern. He laid his head gently on the smaller cub's back, an unspoken promise that he would stay. I shut the barn door and latched it, the click echoing in the stillness. Inside, the two cubs lay close together, their breathing steady, a fragile rhythm of life. For a moment, I simply stood there, unmoving, as tears welled in my eyes. These were wild creatures, untamed, dangerous, but right now, they were just two frightened orphans who needed shelter. I turned and closed the door, leaving them to the dim lantern light. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat by the open doorway, listening to their breath. Each inhale and exhale felt like a miracle. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but inside the barn, there was only the soft rustle of straw and the even breathing of brothers clinging to life. I thought about how fragile everything was. A fallen tree had torn their world apart. A human had saved them from its wreckage. I felt the weight of that responsibility in every thump of my heart. When the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the barn walls, I crept inside, expecting the cub who guided me to slip away as soon as he saw the open door. I had planned to carry the injured cub to the wildlife rescue, his only hope for proper care, and then send the older one back to the forest. But the moment our eyes met, he shifted his massive paws and rose to his feet. He padded to the open door and looked out, as if weighing his options. Then he turned back to me, sat on his haunches, and tilted his head. His eyes were clear. He chose to stay. My chest tightened. He wasn't here for the food I'd left in a tin bowl out on the porch. He wasn't here for easy shelter. He stayed for his brother, and, somehow, for me. A warm swell of emotion rose in my throat. He stayed not for the milk, not for the safety, I whispered, voice hushed with wonder. He stayed for his brother, for memory, for me? He gave a quiet sigh and settled back onto the straw, brushing his brother's ear with a gentle nudge. It was gratitude wrapped in fur, a gesture so tender it brought tears to my eyes. I knelt beside them and placed a hand on the older cub's broad shoulder. His coarse fur scratched my palm, but it felt like the softest blessing. I thought again of that first morning, how he'd sat at the fence under that impossible dawn, as if seeking me out. And now here he was, refusing to leave, determined to guard his family and protect our strange bond. I believed, in that moment, that this reprieve would be temporary. Soon, I'd drive to the rescue center with the injured cub, hand him over to veterinarians, and set the older one free to return to his true home. I pictured him slipping once more into the shadows between the trees, his duty done. But as I watched them huddle together, I realized how wrong I was. This wasn't a fleeting gesture. This was a choice, a wild force of nature, making a human decision to stand by me as I'd stood by them. My hand tightened on his shoulder, and I leaned closer, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of forest pine clinging to his fur. "You're welcome here," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "Both of you." He closed his eyes, accepting my words with a slow, trusting nod. The injured cub stirred and nuzzled his brother's side. In that shared warmth, fear and uncertainty melted away. I stepped back into the faint light of dawn, heart pounding with the enormity of what lay ahead. I had thought I'd offered them a moment's shelter, but they had offered me something greater, a glimpse of loyalty and love that transcended species, a reminder that kinship can be found in the most unexpected places. I left them there, brothers bound by survival and gratitude, and walked back to my cottage. My mind raced with plans, vet visits, permits, long-term care, but my spirit remained anchored to the barn. Things would never be simple again, and I, for one, would never be the same. A few mornings later, when the mist still clung to the pines and I was helping the cub brother to his feet, I sensed that familiar tug, a silent beckoning I could no longer ignore. He paused at the barn door, turned his head, and looked at me with those knowing eyes. Then he slipped away, disappearing into the forest as if to say, "Come with me again." My pulse raced. I gathered my jacket and followed without hesitation, heart thundering between fear and awe. The forest was hushed, the path carpeted in moss that muffled my steps. Every snapped twig held the weight of possibility, wonder or danger. Yet the cub moved confidently, confident that I would follow. We rounded a bend in the trail and entered a small clearing. Sunlight pierced the branches, spotlighting something at the far edge. There, lying among ferns and fallen leaves, was a she-bear. My blood froze. Her flank was dark with dried blood, her breathing shallow and uneven. Around her neck hung a necklace, one I had carved myself decades ago and hung on a low branch to ward off poachers when I'd first rescued her. I swallowed hard, chest tightening. Could it be her? The same bear I'd coaxed from a snare when I was a young game warden, her paw shredded, her trust earned in trembling moments of care. I'd never believed she survived the winter storms that followed, yet there she lay, alive but broken, the pendant I'd made clasped firmly around her neck. Tears brimmed in my eyes as I knelt beside her. She lifted her head, pupils wide with recognition. For a heartbeat, time stopped. I placed a trembling hand on her coarse fur, feeling the faint pulse beneath. My voice caught, "I thought you were gone." She closed her eyes, then opened them again and blinked slow, and in that moment I felt the deepest gratitude pulse through me. It was her children. She remembered and brought me back to herself. Behind me the cub waited, silent sentinel. His eyes shone with relief. He nuzzled his mother's side as if confirming she was truly here. My heart swelled with awe. This was more than rescue or repayment. This was a bond forged in kindness and memory, stretching across years and seasons. I reached into my pocket and produced a small water flask, offering it to her muzzle. She drank carefully, tilting her head back, eyes never leaving mine. Every sip seemed to strengthen her. I knelt in the dappled light, brushing loose pine needles from her fur and murmuring soft encouragements. The cub brother curled beside her, resting his head on her massive paw, and she leaned into him with a gentle sigh. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe the worst was over. I imagined lifting her onto a makeshift stretcher, carrying her back to my barn, nursing her until she could return to the wild. I pictured the three of them wandering free, mother and two cubs, a reunited family in the vast forest. But then she lifted her head and let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through my bones. It wasn't a warning or a threat. It was a declaration. This was where she belonged now. I realized she didn't need my help to leave the forest. She needed me to witness this moment, to acknowledge the depth of her gratitude. She had survived on her own strength, returned by her own will. My throat clenched with emotion. I had given her a chance once, and she had never forgotten. Now her gesture repaid me in kind, bringing me to this clearing, to the living proof that the smallest act of mercy can echo through a lifetime. I rose slowly, brushing tears from my cheeks. The she-bear shifted, pushing herself upright on bleeding paw. The cub stood beside her, forming a trembling triangle of reunion and resilience. The mother dipped her head in a solemn bow, as if offering her thanks in the only way she could. I stepped back, voice thick with wonder. "Go home," I whispered. "Find yourselves out there." She sniffed the air, turned, and led her cubs deeper into the forest, disappearing among the birches as silently as she had appeared. I remained in the clearing long after they were gone, heart pounding with reverence. The necklace lay in the grass where I had unhooked it, glinting like a promise. I picked it up, fingers trembling. I didn't know nature could remember like this. I slipped the pendant onto a nearby branch, where the morning light caught its silver in a single beam. Then I turned and walked back along the mossy path, each step echoing with the memory of what I'd seen, and what I would never forget. I followed the two cubs as they padded silently into the shadowed forest, the morning sun filtering through the canopy in golden beams. The older brother moved with confident strides, glancing back once to make sure I was still there. The younger, though frail, kept pace, each breath steadier than before, each step surer. My chest tightened with relief and awe. They were both strong enough now to face the wild on their own. I watched them slip between the trunks of ancient pines, their little bodies illuminated in patches of light and shadow. The forest seemed to exhale around us, as though honoring this moment of reunion and release. My heart swelled, certain that this was the end of my part in their story, that they would vanish into the green world forever, free and whole. I thought it was their final farewell, but then the older cub halted. The smaller one twitched beside him, as if waiting for guidance. The first cub turned slowly, eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. He rose onto his hind legs, towering, awkward, yet full of dignity, and planted a heavy paw against my chest. The press of his clawed foot was gentle, deliberate. A silent message burned into my skin. He wasn't protecting territory or marking me as prey. He was saying thank you. In that instant, the weight of everything crashed over me. Dawn's hush, the fallen oak, the grief and the rescue, the nights spent listening to raspy breaths in my barn. And here, in this gesture of gratitude from a wild creature, I felt a swell of emotion so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. He showed me something that changed my entire life. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth about nature's mysteries. The cub held his paw for a heartbeat longer, as if imprinting that moment on my soul, then gently hopped down. He nudged his brother, turned as one, and padded away into the silent woods. Their silhouettes dissolved among the trees, leaving me standing alone, hand pressed to the spot where his paw had rested. I remained still, the forest's quiet wrapping around me, as though sharing its secret. My chest heaved with the echo of his gift, and I realized I would carry that moment forever, proof that gratitude knows no language, no boundaries. When I finally walked back towards the village, the world felt both larger and more intimate than ever before. I knew I'd never look at the forest, or at any wild creature, the same way again. When I returned to the clearing where the fallen oak had claimed her life, the forest was silent in a way that felt sacred. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, spotlighting a single silver glint high in the branches. There it hung, my old pendant, the one I'd carved and placed years ago to protect her from poachers. Against all reason, nature had returned it to me. My fingers tingled as I reached up, plucking the necklace from its perch. The cool metal felt impossibly weighty in my palm, a tangible proof of everything I'd witnessed. I stood there, breath caught in my throat, as memories flooded back. The image of the she-bear's trusting eyes when I first freed her paw from that cruel snare, the cub's trembling reunion, and the elder brother's gentle paw pressed to my chest in silent gratitude. I closed my eyes and heard, as clearly as if she spoke them in that very moment, the words I'd whispered long ago. "If you understand, come back someday." I'd thought them a forlorn hope murmured to the woods, yet here was the answer, glinting among the leaves. A rush of disbelief surged through me. Wild creatures, untamed by nature's fiercest laws, remembered kindness. They felt love. They repaid compassion with gestures that transcended instinct. My rational mind balked. This defied everything I'd been taught. But my heart pounded with the undeniable truth of what I held. I knelt on the mossy ground, brushing loose pine needles aside, as if unveiling a hidden altar. Around me, the scent of earth and sap seemed richer, deeper, like the forest itself exhaling in wonder. The pendant's chain swung lightly in the breeze, casting dancing reflections on the fern-fringed earth. Each sparkle felt like a message. You are not alone. You were heard. Tears blurred my vision. I remembered how I'd scooped the injured cub into my arms, how his tiny lungs had fluttered against my chest as if begging for life. I remembered that first cub's unwavering gaze at my fence at dawn, compelling me to follow. And now I understood the full circle. The mother had returned the gift I gave her, trusting me again after all these years. My breath caught as I pictured her massive form stepping through the trees, the cubs trailing at her side, every muscle rippling with renewed strength. She had faced trials and returned not for refuge or food, but to honor the bond we formed. In that moment, the forest became a living testament to reciprocity, every leaf, every bird call a witness. I rose slowly, clasping the pendant to my chest. My knees felt weak, as though the forest's gravity held me in place. The world beyond seemed distant, a village I barely recognized. Here, among these towering pines, I discovered a truth more profound than any human promise, that kindness can echo across lifetimes, that gratitude needs no words. If someone had told me this story, I would never have believed it. I would have smiled politely, chalked it up to fancy, but I saw it with my own eyes. I felt it in my bones, and with each sunrise since, I wake to the thought that nature is wiser than we think, and kinder. I pocketed the pendant and turned toward the path leading home, every step light with wonder. The forest's hush followed me, an invisible blessing. Birds began to sing again, and the world reawoke around me. Yet I walked on, carrying the quiet miracle in my heart. If your heart is now full of awe, right, nature is wiser than us.